Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a video for the Inklipse blog hop with everyone, and there are some great prizes available on this blog hop. So this is just my video for the portion of the blog hop, but you can go check the video description below to find the link to my blog where you can get more details about how to win. So for today's card, I'm going to be using my digital stamp called Moxie Foxy Dapper, and I will be printing it on some watercolor paper. So I have this thin watercolor paper here. It's good enough to feed through my printer and will work with some watercolors, but it's definitely not the top quality water paper. However, when you're printing digital stamps, you need to kind of work with what your printer does. Some work well with watercolor, some don't, some work well with Copics. You know, you have to kind of just figure it out for yourself. But I recommend if you want to try watercolor to go with a thinner one, such as a 90-pound cardstock. So I am getting started with my watercoloring here, and I'm using my Koi watercolors. It's the Koi Sketchbox, and I find that these are really great inexpensive watercolors. I have not found a watercolor paper that they don't work well on. I have a couple other watercoloring mediums available to me, like distress markers or the Prismacolor, not Prismacolor, the Prima oil pastels, Inktense pencils, Colorburst, all that. And there kind of tends to be like certain papers they work well on and others not so much. Whereas with the Kois, I just found like they're the most versatile watercolors I had and the ones I've been happiest with on even this thin, lesser quality watercolor paper. So to color in my fox, I'm just going to use the orange, and what I like about watercolor is that you don't need to have a lot of colors. This sketchbox only has, I believe, 24 colors, or it may even be less than that, for you to choose from, but you can get a really wide range of shading, because with watercolor, the more you layer the color, the darker it gets, and the more water you add, the lighter it gets. So you get, from just one color of orange, you can get the full spectrum. Whereas with your Copic markers, you're going to need, 2 or 3 to blend together. So I'm taking that same orange and just giving some shading to my fox by adding more or less water to the watercolor and by adding more layers. If you find that you're trying to get it a bit darker and it's not layering on the way you like, you might have too much water, and so you want to pause and let it dry or hit it with a heat gun so that it dries a little bit and you'll be able to layer the color again. I like to use either a traditional brush or a water brush without any water in it because I like to be in control of the amount of water that is on the tip of my brush. I find that often with water brushes there's sort of like just a steady stream of water coming out of them, and you can't manipulate the color as easily and get shading. So my recommendation would be to just keep a bowl of water nearby and control how much water is on your brush. When I'm trying to take some of the water off my brush, probably the smart thing to do would be to have a napkin off to the side, but usually I just color it off on my hand, and that's enough to get some of that water down and control everything. So I fussy cut out my digital stamps. I don't have a Brother Scan and Cut, which does a great job with digital stamps, but not in the budget right now. So I'm just going to trace around the edges of my digital stamp with a black pen to just make them look a little bit more finished. As you can see here, I'm comparing my thin watercolor paper to this Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and the Tim Holtz watercolor paper is very white. It's as white as the background grid mat that I work on, whereas the watercolor paper that I printed my fox on was much more of an off-white. So for this background, I'm going to switch over to the Tim Holtz paper. The Tim Holtz paper isn't the most quality watercolor paper out there either. It can start to pill with a lot of wetness, but the bright white quality is pretty important to me. So I've taped it down to my work surface, and I've taped this simple stencil on top. This is a die cuts with a view stencil that I picked up at a local Joann's store. So I'll try to see if I can find the link for the video description. And I'm just going to show you today how you can use watercolor through a stencil. A lot of people don't realize that you can pretty much put any coloring through a stencil, and so I just wanted to show this other option, since usually I'd probably use my inks, but with watercolors you can get that faded look really easily as well. So I am not adding too much water to my brush. If you put a lot of water on your brush, you're going to get it seeping underneath the stencil design, and it's not going to work as well. I also think this is maybe not the technique for your really fine stencils, but if you have the right brush and the right amount of water, I think you could really make it work with anything. But generally, keep your brush on the drier side when trying to go through a stencil. I wanted to just try something a little bit fun. I wasn't sure, honestly, if I would like it, and so that's part of the reason that I've taped the stencil down so that I can lift it up, see how it's coming, see if I like what's happening, and put it back down to add more or less. And I'm just going to take 3 different colors of watercolor and 3 different angles and make a sort of funky loose background here. In between, though, you might want to dry off your stencil, because otherwise the color is going to spread as you apply the next color. Also, if you do get your paper if you get your paper really wet with your stenciling, or the watercolor isn't drying very quickly, I would recommend that you dry each layer in between. However, since I was really controlling the amount of water I was applying, I didn't find that was necessary. But if the watercolor is still wet, it's going to blend, which you actually might want that effect, and that's something you can decide and play with as well. So you see here on the pink, I was moving a little too fast, and actually did get more of it seeping underneath because I was just kind of ready to be done with the project. But if you go slower, you can get more control like I did with the purple and blue. And so I'm going to dry that off and trim it up a little bit because I wanted to focus in on part of the design that I liked best. And there was a little bit of the bottom that I didn't quite like as much, so I'm actually going to stamp my sentiment there to sort of cover up the part that I don't like as much. So that's a trick. If you find that you think there's like a mess up on your paper, it's kind of that extra opportunity for embellishment. You can cover it with all kinds of things. Your sentiment, some sequins, your image. You know, try turning your background around and see if you like a different angle better. I am stamping this little hello from the Create a Smile script sentiments. I'm not quite sure what the name of the stamp set is, but again, I will link it all in the video description. And it has a really pretty font written by Christine, the owner of Create a Smile. And I stamped it off once just to make sure I was going to get a great impression. And I use VersaFine ink because I find that even on watercolor paper, you get really nice, crisp black impression. I decided last minute to add a little bit of clear embossing powder as well, just to give it a little bit more shine. And I keep my clear embossing powder in a large container just so that it is so easy to access that I can decide even that last second to go ahead and emboss something because it is so easy. And then I will trim up this panel to fit against the background, and I'm going to mat it all on a little bit of black cardstock to help bring out that sentiment. I usually try to be pretty generous with my tape, as I do send most of my cards through the mail and I don't want anything coming apart. When I fussy cut my images, I usually put the adhesive on the back before I fussy cut them, partly because it sometimes gives it a little bit more weight if you're using a thinner cardstock, but also so you don't have to worry about getting the adhesive and all the little details of the stamp later on. So once I have that all centered on my background, I'm going to play around a little bit with my fox to see where I want to stick him down. I'm going to be careful not to put his tail off the edge so that I can still mail him. And that's going to be it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'll leave you a link to all the products in the video description below, including my digital stamp, and of course to the blog hop, where you can enter for your chance to win some of the fabulous prizes from the sponsors of the blog hop. Thanks for watching. Bye.